2, 1, and we're
wait.
Abort. Abort.
All right, so this is what we're going to do, guys. So this is coffee style chat, okay? And I'll kind of.
Do I need coffee for this?
I'll kind of lead in with.
Oh, I had a soda. Where the hell did I put that?
I don't even have a beverage. This sucks.
Get your soda.
This event. I have no handlers. I'm very put out.
No blue M&M.
My rider has not been met on any level.
Right.
All right, here's what we're doing.
Good.
I'll do my little intro speech there, and then we're going to get right to it. And again, just coffee style chat. You'll see your names in an order. That doesn't mean we have to go in that order. Okay.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean we need to follow those questions, but I'll lead in with the questions, and away we go. Okay, here we go. 3, 2. Welcome to the Raef Granger Podcast. I'm your host, Raef Granger. This podcast houses all things Raefy, which is to say gaming, podcasting, business, and self-help / self-inquiry in no particular order.
I'm here for the last part.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. We're going to do some self-inquiry. Before I introduce my guests that you see, Russ and I are on the vid. This is a coffee-style chat podcast through all sections of these podcasts. What does that mean? What that means, it's designed to be relaxed. We may take some cow paths off the chosen topic. That's okay and encouraged. This podcast segment is going to be called Raef's Roundtable, and it's going to be focusing on some gaming. And the topic specifically is, where is GW now?
Who's
Without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's roundtable guests in no particular order. We have Russ Wakelin, famous games, rules, and tech nerd, my friend, and co-host of the D6 generation. Hello, Russ, and welcome.
Hello, Raef. Please send coffee.
It's showing up backwards.
No, does it show backwards? Is it better this way?
No, yeah, there you go.
It's funny because on the monitor on my side it looks backwards. So I guess this is my first time really using video. So I guess I have to see it backwards for you have to see it forward.
Did you use a grease pencil? That's an old reference.
So like does this? But I'm testing. This is my state-of-the-art video techniques. Like, does that work?
That works, yes.
All right,
you should put the arrow down, and it would.
I got to figure out how this technology works because this is pretty fancy stuff. So
all right, on to our next guest. We have Craig Gallanet, famous prognosticator and terrain nerd, and my friend and co-host to the D6 generation, Craig Gallanet. Welcome, Craig.
Hi. I don't have my video, so actually, you cannot see that I have a head that is far more average sized than Russ's, and yet at the same time more dignified. And my hair is very, very, very luxurious in both its length and fullness. And I try not to put that out there too often because I don't like making other people feel bad about their coiffures, if you will.
Oh my gosh. Lastly, but not least, we have Dave Farr, famous Gichamadoc, which is Italian for instigator, and master dice roller, my friend and co-host to the Nerd Herders podcast, Dave Farr. Welcome, Dave.
I take exception to your terminology.
Italian. He went all Italian on you.
What's that about?
Yeah, I also don't have video.
I don't know how to spell it right, and I've never found the word in Italian, but she used to call me a Gichamadoc, which stood for instigator.
It's actually a really offensive swear word in Italy. That's
good.
Good. That doesn't surprise me.
I'll get banned over there. So the genesis of this segment, guys, and I've kept this a little bit under wraps with the three of you, but the genesis of this segment actually happened last year at Adepticon, where I was talking with Terrace of Geek Nation Tours and another podcaster, which we think was Greg Dan, but we can't remember who it is. And we were had a very organic discussion over why the three of us thought GW was doing some things right. And I remember sitting there going, man, this would make a really good podcast episode. And so I resurrected it, and I thought, who better to do it with than with Craig Ganger? Awesome.
Hey, Craig's
who
back.
better to do this with?
That took all day.
What is happening?
You look good. I like it.
My hair just disappeared. I don't know what just happened with that.
Those are the craziest headphones I've ever seen. What's going on over there?
They're broken.
I was going to say they're like duct taped and stuck together.
They
I
are.
like it.
Hello, that is actually stage tape. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Stage tape, of course.
I like it.
You
look like
anyway,
RuPaul.
I thought
Thank you.
while I was in Adepticon at the podcast dinner that I thought it would have been really great to have been podcasting this for our listeners. And then I thought, hey, let me do this with my friends, Russ, Craig, and Dave. And then I thought, Dave and Craig, I don't know if you remember this, but our very first episode, actually technically episode 1B of the D6 generation, was on this very topic of GW. And if you two both remember, we weren't exactly fans of it, except for Craig. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, way back to 1B. I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes if anybody wants to hear that old. But, something we used to do on the D6 generation, which I want to keep going, which was we were a show of no hate. This is not a bashing of show of any kind or segment of any kind. And I just thought I'd be interested to talk with the three of you over, what do you think about GW, the company, today? Who would like to take the first crack at that?
Not
Craig
I.
Craig would. Craig totally wants to talk.
Okay. So the state of GW today.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it's positive? Do you think it's negative?
Financially, they're doing much better. That's
yes.
Undeniable. I am much happier with the product that they're putting out. However, I hesitate to say that they are really like turning over a new leaf. I feel like they've changed their direction a bit, and I think that they've managed to somehow really address a lot of the issues people had, but at the same time sort of keep themselves really as the Cadillac of gaming, as far as it still ain't cheap, but I don't think that was ever their issue. They never really had a problem. They never saw that was a problem. And so I think there's no more what isn't there? There's no more a unit that comes, you have to have a minimum of 5, but they can only be bought in blisters of 2, for instance. That's just sort of like the classic example of what Games Workshop used to sort of put out there, right? Where
right. Yep, that's
you were
gone.
Forced to buy more than you needed, but at the same time, you're buying more and more and more. What I like that they're doing is they went through a period of time where they were restructuring and they pulled themselves back from everything but their main lines, right? And then they slowly started to come back out of that. And now you have Warhammer, the under I can't remember all the names, but it's the board game that uses the hexes, and it's in the dungeons below one of the new. I can't.
No one's helping you out, Craig.
You know what's awesome?
I just know Warcry.
You know what's awesome about video is that Russ's disdain, which usually he can hide from his voice for listeners, you can
disdain's a strong word,
plainly on his face. Anyway, I like the fact that they've got all these different products out there. Adeptus Titanicus, Aeronautica Imperialis, Warcry are the 3 that I'm aware of. Necromunda, and it seems like they just keep churning out these what used to be specialist games. And I'm happy and impressed with that because that sort of feeds my GW urge more than 40K has recently, which I think is addressed later on in your notes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, Russ, what do you think about the state of GW?
Well, just for completeness, when Craig mentioned, Raef mentioned we started talking about this in our first episode of the D6 generation, that was 2008.
Yes, it was.
So just to give folks who aren't familiar with that time period, GW is a very different company then, right? So I think they've changed radically. I think they've figured out what they're good at. I think they took a lot of big risks rebooting their fantasy world. I think reimagining the Space Marines as bigger, stronger, better was an interesting move. It got people to buy more stuff, but in a way they wanted to buy more stuff.
Yes.
So, and they've never lost their ability to make great models. I think what they fixed was they also got to a set of rules which embraced who they were, which is the story more than competitive play. They've always said they weren't about a competitive play, but they got back into the rules being a storytelling mechanism more. And I think they figured out a way to get some mechanics in that story could evolve during the game. There could be more variety during the game. So I think they really got a lot of things right. And the other thing I think they nailed was they were always obviously promoted the hobby, But I think recently some of the stuff they've done with their iterations on primer, with their iterations on brushes, with their iterations on hobby supplies, particularly contrast paints, is unquestionably a game changer in the entire industry. I think they did a really good job capturing that. And I found myself using contrast paints on like all these different games I play. I just painted up an entire, Star Wars Legion army using contrast paints. I just painted on my D&D models for a big session today using contrast paints. I was just in the hobby store buying GW supplies to do that. I bought the new Citadel rubber mat because it's freaking awesome, even though it's way overpriced. It's still cool. So they've got me happily spending my money on their stuff, regardless of the hobby. So that's where their money's coming from, right? I mean, also their games are really interesting, and I think Dave can talk more about some of the newer games. I haven't played as many of them as the other folks have. But on the hobby side of the thing, oh my God, they got the best everything: best paints, best primer, best brushes. I mean, they've got it all going on.
I remember before Dave goes, I remember in 2008 when we were talking about it, this frustration as a gamer. We felt like they were producing rules in such a way. This is just for people who might not have been around or remember GW back then, but they were producing rules in such a way. Remember, Russ, where it would come out on one codex, but not your codex. That was one of the things we liked about Privateer Press. We always loved the fluff. We thought the fluff was the greatest. You couldn't seem to play 40K back then somewhat competitively. Craig brought up the part about the blisters where you needed 5 guys, but they sold you 2. I totally forgot about that. And the current market seems to be just a lot different. The rules, like if it comes out on one codex, they figured out a way to make it come out for all. They've got a lot of great products. Remember there was a lot of hate in 2008 against the fan of DW. If you had a blog, they like shut you down. If you had a store and you were talking about a Space Marine, they shut you down. Not exactly sure on the state of the IP now, but I get the sense that they're not shutting us fans down. I mean, I get that community bulletin that comes in my email, and it just seems like just constant new information and new fandom. Supporting the fans is what it seems to me. Dave, what do you think?
I don't know. I guess I take a slightly, my tack is slightly different in that I don't think I do think that they had some issues, but I don't fundamentally think they're all that different from when I got into them back in 99 and 2000, right? Because I remember getting into them, Russ, after you'd opened the store, and they were doing a lot of community support events, and I thought, I'm sure there were some things with the way the models were sold and whatnot, but I remember it being a good environment. But I think what happened is they started to lose their way, and they got a little bit prideful in the fact that they would be untouchable.
The one and only, right?
Yeah. And then they got their teeth punched in by all these little agile companies that came up with all these cool things, right? I mean, Warhammer and War Machine and Hordes, I think were kind of the first iteration. But then games like Infinity, games like Guild Ball. I mean, the amount of
weird miniatures, Malifaux.
Yeah, the amount of miniature games that came out and hit the market was like unprecedented, right? And the reason I think at the end of the day that worked out good for GW is, at least for me, and I have to think, for our group of friends, there was something about when what was the game that came out? Kill Team. So if you remember, Kill Team came out, and a bunch of people are like, we'll try it. They picked up a couple models, and then 40K relaunched, and we had all, it was very smart because we had all just kind of brought out some of our 40K stuff, and we're like, well, how hard could it be to jump back into 40K? And now all of a sudden, instead of my friends playing 13 different games and having all these different rule sets, it's like, it's nice to go back home to GW, and there's always tons of people playing. So I guess for me, my take is I think that there, as Russ said, the models have always been great, but I think they realized that they have to take care of the core gamer, because other companies will come and combat them. But I also think gamers were ready to go back to GW because it's hard to keep up with a new game every 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for us, the 3 of us, 4 of us together, I feel like I started with GW, so it always feels like landing with home. And nothing seems to have played. War Machine was pretty close. I had a lot of cinema in the mind when I would play War Machine. I love War Machine to this day. I still think it's a great game, and I love being back with GW. And I'm playing a Death Guard right now, and I can see the cinema in my mind. I wish the games didn't take as long. I don't know if that's a fault or not a fault, but the games for me seem to take like 4 hours, probably because I'm a little slower on the rules than some. But yeah, I can't. And then I turn around and they seem to be making other games that I'm not angry about that they're making, nor am I angry. Do I feel like my gaming dollars are being siphoned to these other games? Like I want to try Adepticus Titanicus. I can't wait to try that at Adepticon. And I know Craig's talked about that, and I want to get into that next of what we're playing. I know Russ is playing. What's it called? Aeronautica
Imperialis.
I
Yeah,
want to hear about that. Like that
that's
game
great.
seems interesting to me, and I liked X-Wing, so I'm like, oh, well, let's scratch that itch. And then Dave was playing Dave, what's that called? Warcry, the fantasy. Yeah, and that game was fun and it was different. It didn't seem like it was just fantasy light, and so that's just curious to me. I don't know if the CEO, just the one they hired, just knows what he's doing and he just knows, or he's got a great team behind him, but I feel like they're making every decision correct. And I find that fascinating from a company that I think in 2008 we were thinking they were doing a lot of things not correct. Any of you guys have any thoughts on what I just said there?
No, that seems right to me. I think, and I agree with Dave's whole analysis earlier too. I think they just exactly got a little sloppy. They started maximizing their profits in a bad way, right? So I think they're still maximizing their profits now, and they're more profitable. But I would say in the mid to late 2000s, they really started looking at like how much money can we make per miniature, and not looking at the value we're giving to the gamer.
Yeah,
I think
that way.
This is one of the reasons about the hobby supplies, because if you remember about mid 2000s, they redid all the paints, they did the screw tops, and they started pulling back on the amount of paint per pot, and it was like a whole big thing. And I remember people calling into our show and talking on it with us on with email questions about what's your favorite paint. I want to get away from GW. I'm trying to find something else, right? And we were all moving away, and I completely shift. I used to have all the GW paints. I shifted completely over to P3 with Privateer. If you look at today, I've been slowly moving back into the Games Workshop paints. I think you get a lot more value for what comes in there. Again, I think the hobby supplies are great. I think their models have made the same journey, right? It's okay to spend a lot of money if when you open the box, you're like, wow, right?
Yes.
And that's what you want. When you open up Aeronautica and you get a lot of planes and you look at all the cool parts and all the different options, and there's 4 different nose codes per plane. And yes, you're going to have extra bits when you're done, but man, I could custom build each plane exactly the way I want, I think there's something there that you're like, that was cool. I want to go buy more of this stuff. And I think they've captured that magic again. And I think in the mid 2000s, they lost it a little bit. And I think it mostly was they were just trying to maximize their profit margin.
What is your gut? I know you're not, talking to the CEO, but do you have any sense, just, you're an executive, you're a C-level executive in a company.
I would say he's at least a B level.
Wow. Yeah, something. Some level.
I don't know why
what
you
do
need
you
to go
think-
like shortchange him like that.
I don't know. I mean, it's total speculation. I get it. But what do you think happened?
I think they pivoted from putting themselves first and their profit margins first to putting the customer first.
Okay.
So I think
that would serve their
and it does, and that's what Disney, a lot of successful companies do that, right? If you put the customer first and you put customer value first, everything else follows.
Yeah.
You also have to treat your employees right. And I also know, they had some challenges at that time period, what we were talking about, the 2000s. And I think it's gotten better now too, because you need to have a loyal group of employees who work hard and want the company to succeed at all levels, not just the designers, but all the way down. I think they've had a lot of changes there. And I think they just had that turn. And I think when you get a new CEO, they help you do that, right? Because those sort of decisions are top down, and they have to come from the boss. And the boss has to say, you know what, we're going to do things that our customers want. We're still going to make a profit, and we may even charge more in some cases, but you're not going to care. Like Adeptus Titanicus is a great example. They're actually, if you look at what's the price of the boxes, the price to get into Adeptus Titanicus, arguably it's more expensive per game than they used to be. But it's so amazing. It's just so much cool stuff. It's like a collector's edition, right? That
Okay.
it's and so I think we're okay with that. We're those of us who are that hardcore to these hobbies and are placing our lives and we can spend that kind of money. We're like, that's worth it to me.
Right.
Yeah, let's hear from Dave and then Craig.
So to use a business term, I think if we double click on contrast paints, which I hear that all the time in business meetings, but
Wait, Dave,
What does it mean?
I don't know what that means. Seriously,
me
like what
neither.
do you mean?
when you double click, like if you double click a link and you drill down into it further, so it's
No,
like
that part I get, but there's a term that means something in business meetings now.
double click. I'm confused. Sorry, what?
I thought you
So
were
you-
saying that's a term in business.
Double click is a term in business that I hear all the time. If you double click on an idea, you're looking at it further.
Oh, okay.
So
I've not heard that.
So, like if you look at that was a failed flop. You should edit that out.
No, I'm
That
keeping
went-
it. That's
that
the
went
I
a
don't want to
weird-
say
They'll
anything.
take care of that in post.
That went a whole weird
Exactly.
direction. Okay, so anyway,
I'm just gonna start
contrast.
saying that, Craig, every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right. So if you look at contrast paints, I think that's a great example of the company doing something like that was a trifecta, because it's good for the hobby, it's good for the game, it's good for the company, it's good for the gamer. Like it covers the gamer, the company, and the hobby as a whole. Because when I first saw it, I was like, it's not great paint. It's not it doesn't make you paint better, right? So at first I'm like, why are they doing this? And then when they made the announcement, they're like, what is the worst part of gaming? When you put all this effort into an army and you sit across from a gray or black army, that
Right.
stinks. And so what contrast paints have done have allowed people like Craig, who have a really high output of painted models, right? And I think I have a pretty high output.
Yes.
But then other people have other people just don't do it, and all of a sudden this gives them the opportunity, for the amount of effort they put in, to get a really nice looking army, or decent enough looking table quality army. And again, I went out and spent, I don't know what they are, $5 a piece. I can't remember. I
think
know
they're
I
more
spent
than
like 80,
About
90
$8.
bucks.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I'm like, well, I think I bought 4. I loved them. And then I went back and spent like 80.
I did the same thing. I keep buying one more, and I'm trying to remember which ones I don't have. So every time I go out,
Yeah, they have an app for that. But I think that's a good example. And I think my other point to talk about what Russ was saying is, I think Warcry is another good example where people got into Warcry locally, and I bought a faction out of somebody's starter set for like $35, and then and the quality of the models was so good that I was like, you know what, I'm going to invest. And I think I spent $100 on a nice set of terrain, and that terrain is amazing. I would use that in RPGs. I will use it obviously I use it for Warcry. And I bought the cards, and I bought some other things, but it's like, I feel like they figured out how to give you top-notch quality. And again, like, it's not cheap. Like, I paid $100 for a skirmish level game's terrain, but I still felt okay about it. Like, I feel like I got my money's worth.
$100 for all the terrain you need to play a skirmish game is actually pretty good. Most skirmish games would take up more space, but I think that's kind of where they're really hitting again on all cylinders, where they start with between Kill Team and Warcry, where it's actually like half board game, half miniatures game, right? Where you actually have the board is part of the terrain. It comes with it. It's like a hard cardboard board, right, Dave?
Yep.
With some really nice art on it, and your terrain goes on top of that, makes the whole game environment. So right out of the box, you're not looking for a table, you're not looking for a surface, you've got everything right out of the box. And if I'm going to build, let's say, like a nice sort of equal-sized game board for, let's say, my Marvel Crisis Protocol or Infinity, or something, it's going to cost a lot more than $100 to get all of those pieces put together. So I think that's actually a really good price. And I think the other thing, to just sort of piggyback on what you're saying, Dave, is we used to think like, oh, they've got these cool, like Necromunda. Oh, Necromunda's cool. Oh, I wish I could use these guys in 40K. And there was never that sort of cross. You might get an article in in White Dwarf, but that would be it. Now, every time there's a new set of models that comes out for one of these peripheral games, they include, quite often, not always, but quite often, all of the rules you need to play it in the other game.
Yeah. And that's very Disney-esque too.
That's true. Yeah. And so Warcry, I believe you can, like, every time you get a warband for Warcry, you can field that as a unit in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. They
good point.
cross-pollinate really well. And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's funny because that when you say that, I remember reading some academic articles about Disney and how they do a really good job of, it's like, oh well, we've got somebody that sings for our Disney show, but then they also make music, which we can sell, which then we can use that, use them also for appearances in movies, and and I feel like that's kind of how these big companies have to operate, right? It's like, well, if you want to play board games, here's a game that's good for you. But if you want to dip your toe into Age of Sigmar, it's not that big of a leap now because you've got these couple pieces and, oh, we've taught you how to paint
Right.
with contrast paints. And now you want to get better. And now you buy more paints. And
Oh, did we mention this warband could be the part of an army? All you got to do is buy a couple more boxes
Right.
and you have models for a small war size game.
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Craig, where are you in the GW hobby? What's grabbed your fancy? And then I want to hear more from Russ about Aeronautica, and then from Dave about Warcry.
Well,
And,
it's
and I'm
funny
thinking
you
like
should mention
a
Aeronautica.
super mini elevator pitch of like, what you're into in case people want to, who've not been introduced to GW before, how they could get introduced to it.
Well, for me, Warhammer 40,000 is at its best, probably in the entire time I've played, which goes all the way back to Rogue Trader when the company first started creating the Warhammer 40,000. However, it's a long game, and I know that people will say, "Oh, but the tournaments can go by really, and you got 2 or 3 hours." And I have never played a game of 40K where I felt like, "Oh, that was a quick game." Now,
Same here.
I never begrudged the time. I never finished going, "Oh, that took too long. The game overstayed its welcome." I've enjoyed every game I've played all the way to the end. But when you're looking at your evening at the end going like, wow, I played one game in the amount of time that I probably could have played one game and had a really nice dinner, or 2 games or 3 games. And so I went all out in 2019 playing 40K. I went back to 40K. I doubled the size of one of my armies. I bought a whole new army that was hugely infantry heavy and painted that all up and really enjoyed myself. But at the same time, I felt that lack of forward momentum in my hobby. I was like, wow, I played 2 games in the amount of time I could probably have done an entire campaign in some other game. And so that sort of started pulling me away from 40K. And the other thing that started pulling me away from 40K is all of the campaign books, which are awesome. And that is a way to move the game forward, both narratively and rules wise. And each one of these campaign books comes with rules for all these different armies. The problem is we're getting back towards where we were in 2008, where you're going to need a whole bunch of books to really be competitive. So if you want to know all of the actual options that your army has, you're going to have to figure out which campaign books have rules for that army. Then on top of that, maybe there's new cards that came out because of the new rules. And then on top of that, who are you going to play against? Like maybe your favorite opponent plays like Eldar, but then all of a sudden the Eldar get totally revamped in the new campaign, and you don't know what to anticipate or expect. So right now, I feel like 40K is in a moment of flux again, where there's a lot of rules out there in lots of different places that you need to be able to go and find them. And I started rubbing up against that just a little bit towards the end of my league games in the summer league that I was playing, where I was starting to see things I didn't recognize from my basic knowledge of going through all of 8th edition with everybody, right? I was there. I had the codexes, I had the cards, I had everything. But all of a sudden these campaign books were coming out, and I was like, I'm good with where I am. I don't need a new, campaign book's cool, but I don't need it. And all of a sudden I was starting to see stuff that I didn't recognize, and I didn't figure, like, oh, I know that unit's okay. But then boom, that unit can now do these different things, and they have access to this stratagem, which totally changes them, which is awesome, especially if you're involved in the game. But I felt almost like it was getting back to where War Machine was, where you have to constantly maintain your knowledge of not just your army, but everybody else's army to be competitive. And it's started to get a little frustrating. So where I've been 40K wise lately is I kind of pulled back completely from Games Workshop, mainly just because of the length of the games, a little bit because of the rules that were popping up in other places, but mainly the length of the games. And Russ, of all people, dragged me back in with Aeronautica Imperialis because
Russ
awesome
is good
models.
like that.
He is. Well, but never with a GW game before, though.
It hasn't been a GW game in a while that he's
And
done.
I was excited because I think Russ was excited because he was like, well, this is the game that I'm going to be the alpha guy with. Nobody's going to need models. I'm going to have everything. And he totally did. He bought everything you need for both sides that exist right now. And we played it, and I was like, oh, I really like it. Now it's cool that I don't need to get any models, but oh, the models are really cool. And I happened to be in a store, and I looked at the models, and I was like, well, they are pretty neat. And the next thing you know, oh, I got a little extra credit that I wanted to spend. And then the next thing you know, oh, the Christmas money. And now I have everything, not for two factions. I have everything I need for the one faction that I've chosen. So that's a bonus over what I usually do, where I jump in with everything. And it's because of the quality of the game, the speed of the game. I love the fact that this is not a game that's taking this is a game that's taking an hour, maybe, right, Russ?
Right, it's pretty fast.
Yeah, and setup is extremely fast because it's an aeronautic game. So really, you're setting up these nice boards that you're just flying over, and you need the hexes to do all your maneuvers and everything. It's simple but deep, and the models are beautiful with a bunch of different options coming out of the box. And I just really enjoyed it. And it's 100% the 40K universe. So you're still there. Your little airplanes, you got tiny little heavy bolters on them. You got tiny little assault cannons. If you're playing the orcs, there's like the big shooters, and you can identify all these different elements of 40K without spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars and hundreds of hours, and then hundreds of hours again playing, it seems, to get the game. Whereas you can at least immerse yourself in the universe. And I think Adeptus Titanicus probably does the same thing. The games take longer, but it's another way that you've got a couple big titans, couple medium titans, couple small size titans, maybe a few knights. The other guys got the same, and then you're throwing down, and you don't have these huge swelling armies with hundreds of models, and which again, that's awesome, especially if that's what you're looking for. But when you want a faster game, when your game time is at a premium, I think these other games, I can't remember that board game, the Age of Sigmar board game, I love that too. That's a lot of fun, and that game takes like a half an hour, right? So I think they're doing a lot of things right in that way, so that they're more. I think for a while they were like, oh, we don't want you to play those side games because then you're not going to be paying any more money for 40K models. But you know what? I wasn't paying any money for 40K models, and I wasn't about to support their new stance, if that's what it is. But they had an Aeronautica Imperialis, and I just dumped a whole bunch of money into that because faster, fun, still in the same universe. And so that's where I am 40K wise right now.
Okay. Love it. Russ, tell us about this Aeronauticus game. You're talking to a gamer in an elevator, and he's like, well, I've heard about that game. Why play it?
Well, it brings back, so there's been quite a few, flight sim games or flight combat games. I think they kind of got, back in the 90s, if you remember the Crimson Skies one where you laid the little tiles down.
Yeah.
It was sort of like a HeroClix space thing. And then you had the Wings of War stuff, which eventually grew into X-Wing. What I like about Aeronautica
40K
is, of course,
had one with spaceships. I remember you two playing
well,
that.
GW had Battlefleet Gothic, but then also they had, they did come out with Aeronautical Imperialis, I think Imperialis like in the mid 2000s or something. It was a Forge World only thing, so it was a little bit inaccessible. The rules were okay. I never played it, but I saw it, but it looked like it took a long time. So the new one came out. I loved it for a bunch of reasons. One, it uses a hexagon board, which makes it play way faster than X-Wing, because you don't have to measure out your movement with templates and figure all that out. It's just like you can do it better. There's some innovative mechanics with how you plot your movement, but it still has the imperfect knowledge. You have to kind of pick your moves before you do them. The models, as Craig mentioned, crazy good.
Can I ask a quick question to help me visualize it? Is this up in space, or are you fighting over like
atmosphere?
Like
you're in atmosphere. What's nice about it too is they added a lot of interaction between your aircraft and the ground. They did two things that really make the game work. One, the bases have dials in them, and one of the key dials indicates altitude of the plane. And they made altitude really matter in a very simple way, which is you don't have to worry about. There's just like 6 levels of altitude or 5, I can't remember. It's not very many, but there's a few other levels of altitude. The big thing is if you're at the same altitude, your to hit rolls are straight up. But for every altitude level above or below your target is of you're -1 to hit. and that makes a huge difference. So if you're all too far apart, you simply can't hit the person. And if you're one or two off, you're in trouble. So you tend to go up and down. What this lets them do, though, is some really neat things. First of all, it's easy to adjust your plane's altitude, and now you can have rules for landing, getting down to the ground, picking up troops, deploying troops, bombing runs, strafing runs are all in there. They have firing arcs, not only left, right, front, and center, but also belly turrets and dorsal turrets, which can only fire at targets above you or below you. It gives you a nice sense of air. It doesn't feel like a Navy game that happens to be planes. It actually feels like there's altitude. Yeah. So all of that's great. There's a token set you can get and things you can buy to add bunkers and ground targets, and there's rules for ground turrets and flat cannons and all that stuff. So it's got all that going on, but it plays super fast, which is what I really like about it. It has the great GW models, and this is, I think, the thing that fixes what Craig pointed out as being broken in 40K for me right now. So when the latest edition of 40K came out, I broke up my Imperial Guard. I've never sold them. It was my first army. I'll never get rid of them.
Russ's Roughnecks.
Yes, still playing them. Still had a great time with them. But again, to your guys,
what's the guys with the caps? I can't think of
the Rough Rider. Well, the Mordian Iron Guard are my main
That's
dudes.
it. Yeah.
So they, I like where it is. It's got all the fluff, the cards in the game that give your units the special rules, make you feel like all the factions are still there and the sub factions and all that. I love the way objectives work. I love the way terrain works now. The only rule I still don't love is the lack of firing arcs and vehicles and facings. But it does make the game play a little faster, but it doesn't really play fast enough for me. So I almost it's like there's a simplification that I'd almost be willing to give up, except the rest of the game takes so long. So
I know what baffles me.
I know. So, I think the reason is you have to look everything up. So every single thing you do has to be looked up. Like every vehicle is slightly different, different wound points. They take different kinds of, degradation, which is a great mechanic, but it reminds me of Rogue Trader Datafax, era stuff where you've got to find the right thing. And no one's figured out yet how to make a good, simple, easy to use app that does all that for you instantly. And I really wanted to get in with the Orcs. So when Speed
I was
Freaks
going to
came
say,
out
you were
last year,
almost tempted with the Orcs.
no, I did. I bought Speed Freaks, the board game that was like an Aeronautica for Orcs. It was basically Gorka Morka rebooted. I was super excited about it. The models are crazy. Unfortunately, they went the opposite direction with Speed Freaks. They made the rules so simple that it was just boring. It was just not a fun game. Not enough meat on the bones, if you will. So, but I'm like, well, I got all these Orc vehicles now, to Dave's point. I can go play 40K now. But again, I started trying the rules, and it was just, the games I'm not in a time in my life where I can just throw away every weekend and a whole Saturday in a 40K game. So,
but I want you to keep going, but I want to pause on that thought because I've thought about that too. I too feel frustrated that they take 4 hours, but I play role-playing games that play 4 hours. So
yes, but I'll tell you why, because I just played D&D for 6 hours today with my family. That was my family. That was 6 people playing for 6 hours together.
Much more social.
Right? It's much more social. And quite frankly, the other thing that happens is, and this is the same, all long-playing high strategy games have this problem, and it's something that, I know this, you hated this, Craig, but it's something War Machine fixed very early and GW still doesn't figure it out, which is, if I'm going to be in a 4-hour game or commit an entire day, I'll tell you right now, every hour that D&D game today for 6 hours, fully engaged, had a blast, story was being told, we were all in it, there was no winners and losers, it was just fun. Okay. If I'm going to be playing a 5-hour game of 40K and I can see in the first half hour I bought the wrong army to this fight and I'm going to lose, and I'm going to have to sit here and be a good sport for 3.5 more hours of no fun because I'm just going to lose, and the story's not really even unfolding because my opponent's min-maxed his army or whatever, right? Like, that's not fun for me. Now, I think the World 40K community is getting better about that, and you don't see that. You don't see the min-maxing as much, but you still see my guys have no chance because of what I bought or brought. Or now, I will say that the tokens and the way some of that works, the game can turn on a dime and you never really know. But that's what's missing for me. Whereas I don't mind getting hammered in a game of War Machine, but it's over quick because my caster died and I screwed up. And like Rose and I just played War Machine last week. We still play War Machine very regularly. And she died early, made a mistake. Let's play again. Boom, right back into it, right? So it's they have, and the other thing about War Machine still has now is they made the pivot to that app, and I have my rules right there, and I can pick up and play that game again with minimal relearning of anything. And that's, I think, where I feel when I watch the games in the game store of 40K, I feel intimidated for the players just watching it. I don't know. Maybe it's my old 40K anxiety, but I just watch and I hear all the discussion about when this can go and when that can work and how these interactions do. And I'm like, man, but I think that's why these other games that you guys are talking about, like Shadespire and all these other, new fast ones, have all the feel of Games Workshop games, but they're simple and they play fast and they're fun. And Underworld's over in 15, 20 minutes, Dave, and then you're back to the next game. Like they've done, and that's fine. So they've got their big flagship product. That's a massive investment of time and money, but who cares? Because if you got the time and money, love it. But they also now have these small, fun, almost beer and pretzel games for someone like me, who I can collect the GW models, enjoy their amazing, models, and I'd be able to play a game in an evening, before dinner.
Yeah. Dave, what are you into?
I think for me, it's in the GW world right now. It's 40K and Warcry.
What would you say about Warcry to somebody that's not heard about that game?
So the thing about Warcry that I like is it scales very well. So for the person that wants to get in and play with minimal investment and minimal choices, right? Because sometimes too many choices is overwhelming. You can get the starter box, which is 2 factions, all the dice, all the rules, plenty of terrain, and it passes that it doesn't quite pass the Christmas morning test where you can open it and play because you could put the models together. But once you get the models together, everything you need is laid out in front of you, right? And the thing that they've done that I think is new and interesting is everything is laid out on cards, right? So you pull out all your stuff, you pull out one card, and it tells you exactly how to set up the terrain.
Russ, you would like this. Have you seen this mechanic?
Yes, I have. It looks really good.
Yeah. And I like that because we call it Zamboni the table, right? Like, hey, somebody come and fairly distribute the terrain for me. Mm-hmm. You don't have to worry about that, right? Sometimes it's a lot of terrain, sometimes it's little terrain. Then the next thing you do is put a deployment card. Well, actually, before you even do that, you divide your army up into 3. So then when you flip that deployment card, you know that section 1, 2, and 3 are going to go in these 3 spots. And so it forces you to kind of be fair in how you set up your army, right? And sometimes a faction won't even come on. So if you stack a lot of...
And when you say army, you mean what, like 5 to 12 models, right?
Yeah, I think the out of the box thing is, it's probably 10. It depends, right? Because there are some little armies and some big tough armies. But I would say 3 to 12 is good. But then it does have some expandability. So I bought a second set of my models, which are Iron Golem, because you do point out your list, right? So when you buy a box, it's about 1,000 points, which is what you can play. But I could swap out my 2 little guys for an extra big guy, right?
Okay.
So you can kind of ramp up the tactics there, and you can do a little bit more. They've got, I think, 3 or 4 sets of terrain now, so you can buy different types of terrain and mix and match. And they actually print terrain cards that actually mix the different terrain sets together, so that it's all played out for you. So, but and it's quick. It's quick. It's another one of those games that for me it's a little tough because the quicker a game, the less fair it has to be, right? So sometimes you play a game and it's not super fair, right? Like I played Matt the other day, and it's like you have 3 turns to wipe these guys out. And, when you play a guy like Matt, he's always got a way around things. And, I knew it was going to be an uphill battle, but it was a 20-minute game, and you just set it up and
you just play it out, and then you're done.
Right.
Now, Dave, when you buy a box, can you build the models in the box multiple different ways? Because that's another difference, right? That Games Workshop is making that seems counterintuitive, but it seems to work for them, where they used to be the kings of, you buy this box and it makes these 3 units, and every guy in the unit can have totally different weapons. And nowadays it's like, if it's not a monopose, meaning you only have one option for the way that guy's going to look and how he's going to be equipped, they might have 2 different sets of arms for each guy. So there's a little bit of leeway. Is there leeway in the Warcry boxes, so that maybe when you built the first box, that one big guy had this one weapon, but when you built it a second time, he had the option of having 2 other weapons or something like that?
That's a great question.
No.
No.
Oh.
They're monopose. Those
Negative.
No, so I would say, so I could argue the point and say, oh yes, there's tons of variety, but no, there isn't. I mean, so in the Iron Golem box, I think I had 12 models, and the leader, for example, static pose.
Yeah.
The big guy with he's got a big huge metal ball for his right hand and a big huge hammer for his left hand. That's just one pose. The little guys, you could give one a shield and a stick, or two sticks, or I think one of them had I don't know what the weapon is called, but the chain with a thing at the end.
Flail.
Sure, flail sounds good.
Okay.
I think the technical medieval term is chain with a thing on the end.
Yes.
I like chain and the thing on the end.
Yeah, chain with a thing.
Dave, let's double click into that, Dave.
Yes, let's double
click
click onto that.
Yeah, let's double click that. Yes, well played.
But no, so you would be hard pressed to
but the little
customize
guys
them,
too, right? The little guy, like what you're saying. I think what you're saying is the little guys might have a couple different options, because that's the way. Well, you've also built Necromunda gangs, right? So is it kind of like that, where your leader is your leader, and that's the way they're going to be, and maybe the heavy is the heavy, and there's not a lot of options there, but there's a couple different options for some of the smaller guys. So
yeah, there are a couple options. I think, it's funny though, and this is kind of one of those good and bad, right? As I remember back in the day when we put together like Cadian guys, for example, right? And you'd have those flat arms that would fit. The flat arm at the shoulder would hit the flat chest, and so you could like raise the arm up or lower it down, or so you could get some variation that way. These now it's like the shoulder pad fits in with a square peg that's got to fit in the right way. And so if you want to customize them more than okay, I'm going to stick this arm that has a shield, or I'm going to stick this arm on that has a sword, you're kind of hard pressed to do it. So yes, there is a little bit of variation, but the other thing about Warcry is that model then translates to a card, and that card has a points value. So I couldn't be like, oh, I'm going to give him a shield and this chain with a thing on the end.
Buying specific guys.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, because you're either the guy with the shield and the stick, or you're the guy with the chain and the thing on the end. These are all very technical terms. But yeah, you can't. If you were to then screw that up, right? Then you sit across from your opponent and you go, well, this counts as this because it doesn't look right.
Okay, I get it. So you're limited by the cards, which is again a good and bad.
Yeah, exactly. That's the plus and minus is, you've got 11 choices for Iron Golems, and your guys need to kind of match up to that, or you have, it's a little bit unfair to your opponent, I would think.
Yeah, it seems it. But it also makes army building much quicker.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. All right. Well, we're getting towards the end of this segment, and I want to end with this last thought. And Dave, you're going to go first, unless you want to pass to think about it. Dave, what is your favorite GW memory in the form of an army you used to have, or just a particular memory that comes to your mind when you think of GW in a nostalgic way?
In a nostalgic way, I don't know. I mean, so for me, it's all about the experiences. I would say. And it's funny because it ties directly to Craig and Russ and John Wakelin, who is the unsung hero of my 40K life. But way back in the day, I remember when Russ had Daka, and for people who never got to see the store, it was this awesome converted manufacturing space in an old New England mill building. So you'd walk in, and it was, in my mind's eye, it was like a football field's worth of space, and it had these 4 foot by 8 foot tables all kind of lined up in this nice organized way. And I spent, I don't know, I'm going to say 2 months, but maybe it wasn't that long, working on my very own table. And I remember, and it was a big part of my life, right? I was there, I worked there part-time. I was there at least one night a week, if not 2 or 3, and on the weekends. And I still remember going out and kind of debuting that table for the first time and getting people's feedback on like whether the terrain, because back then it was like, oh, is the terrain balanced and how does it work and is it fair and can you play, could you play multiple times? And I built this big church with the floor cracked open, and in the bottom was
Was you? I thought that was Craig.
No, that was all Dave.
yeah. And Craig will know the name of this. What's the name of that weird Aztec calendar thing that was in the middle? It's
Ziggurat.
no, that's a pyramid. This is like the circular calendar.
I don't know.
Got me.
There's a technical term, Dave,
Sorry
you
to
can
fail
pull out.
you with the.
If you ever go on a cruise or to Mexico for any reason, you'll see these big circular things that they sell to tourists that have like all these little iconographies on them. And I'd put that in the floor of a broken church and painted it all cool so it looked like a chaos thing.
I Googled it, Dave, and it's literally called an Aztec circular calendar.
There you go.
So there you have it.
And I was
File that under a chain with a thing on the end.
yes.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, but no, that's probably one of my favorite memories. I love that table, and I love building it and having fun with it. So that was a good time.
All right, Craig, you want to go next?
Yeah, I was agonizing over what I was going to say. I mean, I've built a way more armies than is good for me. I've played a whole bunch of games. But Dave really, the DACA era, in large part because of Russ and John, really is the golden age to me of 40K. Even though the rules weren't as good back then, I think.
What was that, second edition?
No, that was third.
Third.
And everything. Then the FAQs started coming out, and then we had all those issues with so third and fourth, I think, between the two locations. But I loved building those tables. I loved playing on them, and I remember this isn't a good memory. I remember spending all this time on these buildings and all this stuff that I did. And then they came out with one of the many FAQs there towards the end of third that oversimplified terrain. And so I would be playing and people would be like, no, you can just walk through that wall. And I'd be like, I built that wall. You can't walk through that wall. You can't see through that wall. And I was like, ah, but I loved, and I think my favorite 40K table that I did there was the Hell's Reach table for Armageddon, where it was it was a high tech table with all kinds of urban terrain on it, and it had like a water feature that was a sort of a harbor that went into a channel.
Oh yeah,
across the board, and had bridges, and it had I put little gross little mutated sharks in there and the silicone, and I just loved playing on that table and seeing, actually. You know what? This is a weird thing about me. I like watching people play these games quite often more than I enjoy playing them. And I would love just to watch my friends play on these tables and see how, the models looked on the tables. And I would just quite often go there early and walk around the tables, just kind of like a helicopter view of all the different tables of Dave's tables and John's tables and just really the tables are really what always, the armies come and go to me, but the tables stay in my memory.
All right, Russ.
Wow. So I'm trying not to make this all about DACA, so I'm going to try to
hard not
do that. But it's hard not to, because Dave mentioned Disney earlier, and I just finished watching, if you have Disney Plus and you're at all interested in the Walt Disney Company, and you have any interest at all in technology and engineering, you need to watch. There's a exclusive series on there called Imagineering, and it's all about the history of Walt Disney World's Imagineering division and what they did through the years. And it's fun because they take snapshots of the various, rides and experiences that we all know, and they talk about making them. And at the end, it's interesting because they talk to these Imagineers who've been around forever now, and they talk about the joy the Imagineers would feel after all that hard work of seeing someone experience the ride and actually get it, that it worked, and have that emotional reaction. And I think, Craig, you sort of nailed it when we were all involved with DACA, and all of us on this particular episode were. It takes so many moving parts for something like a Disney to work. And of course, it's not even the same scale, but it took so many moving parts for my favorite things were the mega battles when on a Saturday, all these amazing tables that Craig had the most hours into them, but John had built a couple, and Dave and other contributors had built terrain, and some people had donated beautiful terrain, and it was just amazing. And we put them all together in some weird configuration, and then players would talk about the event months beforehand, and they'd come in and they'd explain how they're painting their army just a certain way for this event. And I got this one character, and I think he's going to be perfect. And they'd spend all this time, and then they'd come, and we'd play all day, and it was like a D&D game because we didn't really care who won. It wasn't really about competition at all. But you'd have these amazing tables and these like 20 or 30 people playing and these models, just all a giant armies battling, and it all just came together. And it was just an amazing experience that really just took the hobby to a level that at that time, I think other hobbies, other game companies have done similar things. And at that time, it was just really amazing. But for me, it all started, my most special memories, and maybe it's because it started here. It was back in the 90s when we first had our league and pre-Daka days. But when we first started the website, one of the things we would do is everybody had their own painted army. And to encourage people to paint their armies, I said, look, if you paint your army, I'll bring at this time, this is before digital cameras, I'll bring my little camcorder and I'll take pictures of your army and we'll put pictures on the website as long as you write a paragraph for each unit and explain what that unit's about. And each player would write up these great background stories, and we had these, we called them army profiles of these different armies. And it wasn't just, here's my Dark Angels army. No, it was like, here's this special unit that I crafted, and these are my special chapter of the Dark Angels, and here's my, and that was just so cool for me. And you could see people could showcase the hours they spent painting the models, and we could play. And when that happened, when those two armies that were on that webpage and people painted played, it wasn't really about who was winning and losing. It was just about the story that was unfolding. And so for me, that's what really got me into miniature gaming. And all my miniature gaming today, regardless of what game I play, come from those early experiences. So for me, that's all the magic of Games Workshop. And for me, Games Workshop will always be my first love when it comes to miniature gaming, because that's the game company that got me into this. I may play other games now, and I was just talking to Kirk about this the other night. My favorite miniature fantasy game by far, Song of Ice and Fire. My favorite sci-fi miniature game right now, it's got to be Star Wars Legions, now that there's 4 factions. I still go back to War Machine because it's quick and easy to play, and my daughter loves it, right? So none of my go-to sort of tabletop war games are Games Workshop games, but doesn't mean I still don't love them, doesn't mean I still don't buy their stuff, doesn't mean I don't get suckered into all these great little games they're producing, because they do good stuff, and they're still my first love when it comes to miniature gaming.
Yeah. My favorite memories are too that same era. And a matter of fact, I have one of my very first armies is called the Stone Dogs, which was a Space Wolf army, but painted in a desert theme. And I actually have him on my desk.
And there he is. Look at that.
That's my wolf priest, Tiberius. And I'll try to take a pic of that and put it up. But that same area of just creativity. And I also too built a table. I totally forgot until you reminded me. I built a Nurgle theme table with Dave. And I remember there was like an icky green river through there. And these tables were Games Day quality. Remember Games Day? That's another memory I have is I remember taking off of work. I was an associate at a law firm. I remember taking off of work because they were launching, I think it was 3rd edition. And we went to Connecticut. I think it was Russ,
I remember that.
Craig, Juan, Dave. I don't know if you were there or not on that one. I think it was John Wakelin. And I remember just reading the rules and absorbing the fluff, and that was super fun. I remember I have very fond memories of Russ's Roughnecks, his Imperial Guard army. I remember his orcs that he used to play lovingly. I remember Craig built this whole Imperial Guard army. I want to remember based on conscripts, like they were all in orange suits.
Boston the Damned.
Yeah, a complete Imperial Guard army. And Dave's army that I think I remember the most is the one that you made with Cherubal, based off of the Dan Abnett. What are those books, Dave?
Eisenhorn.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Eisenhorn books, which had Cherubal in there. I remember that. I remember Russ, a couple Russisms. I remember whenever we would get into a rules debate that, Russ, I'm going to screw it up, but I remember it in my own head. It'd be something like, well, I think I can do this. And you'd be like, well, that's not written in the rules. And I'm like, yeah, but I think the way I'm interpreting the rules, you're like, well, if it's not written in the rules and you can play rules that aren't even written, then what's to stop me from picking up this model and throwing it at your chest, Raef?
It's the doesn't say I can't rule. So whenever someone says,
Yeah, tell people
I'm going to
that.
do this because it doesn't say I can't. And that's when I'd say, well, it doesn't say I can't throw my model at you either. So you can't play rules by it doesn't say you can't.
And back then, those big models were all metal.
They were.
That's right. Yeah, so I remember that. And then I remember another time, which I think it's credited to Dave, but I actually think it was Russ. There's sort of this lore among us that Craig has the crappiest dice, and Dave is like the Craig whisperer. Dave's the only person that when Craig's having a bad move, where Dave can push Craig's buttons. And I think Craig was having a really crappy game one time. He's like, this is
about right.
He's like, rolling terribly. He's having a horrible time. And he's like, it's not you. And I think it gets credited to Dave, but I think it was Russ. Correct me if I'm wrong, Russ. And Craig's like, it's not you, Russ. I'm just having a terrible time. And Russ says, I don't know about you, but I'm having a great time.
Could be either of them.
I say it was probably both of us.
I think that happened
at different times.
That's probably right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whenever because here's the thing that listeners also need to know, though, is that Craig is well known for doing that, right? He'll come onto the game and he'll play an army that, let's say, is great in hand to hand, and I'll play an army that's great in shooting, and so I'll kill 30% of his army first turn. And his face, he looks as if his puppy just died, and he's just like
Feels that way too.
he's like, it's, I'm sure it's fair. I mean, I know you've got this special rule and you can re-roll everything. It's fine. I'm sure it's fair. I'm sure somebody
sounds
read
like
these
it's
rules.
a recent memory.
And then all of a sudden he'll, this will happen, and or oh god, I can't even pull the right card. And then by the end of the game, he's won by like twice as many victory points, and he's like, boy, I didn't see that coming. Boy, gosh, sorry if I complained in the early on, and I just learned early on I didn't have to feel bad for him. I'm like, yeah,
that's right,
Craig. I'm having a great time. You
Yeah.
Dave, you can literally take the example you just gave and put it into our last Star Wars Legion game.
That's true.
That's the same exact story. Wow, those characters are really powerful. I mean, I know Star Wars.
They were powerful.
They're really powerful. I just don't. Yeah, that's man.
I don't see how I could possibly win. It's just
right.
It's that.
I don't know.
He's got a special talent.
I'm trying to get better to the point where I've had many conversations with Russ. Like, Russ, what am I not seeing that you're seeing? Because right now I feel like I'm going to luse. And he's like, I don't even care.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll
whatever it is
Just
you're
watch
not
the
seeing.
movie.
I don't
Watch the
want you
movie.
to see it.
I think I'm just gonna have to start framing it in terms of acts, like in a play. Like, just Craig,
right.
we're in the second act. This is where the hero's down right now. You'll be fine. Hang on to the third act. It's gonna be great.
Right.
Watch and see.
John Wick took some punches before he came out.
Right. It's gonna be okay.
Right.
It's gonna be okay.
Hero's got to look like he's about to die before the end of the movie can be really
Makes
a
for a
punch.
better story. Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's perhaps the best ending I could have hoped for this segment, in that, a lot of people ask me that don't know anything about miniature gaming and in the world of video games, which we all like to, except maybe to the exception of Craig. Not that Craig doesn't like them, but he doesn't necessarily go in for that. But that, why would you want to even play that and not a video game? I'm like, are you kidding me? You get to be out with people and with friends and sharing stories and physically in the world. And so I feel like that little laugh fest.
And you have these things, these armies that are physical and real, and you can sell them on eBay for like 10% of what you paid for them, not including all your time and effort of painting them. I mean, that's just awesome. You can't do that with a video game.
That's so true. That's so true. Well, I just want to thank all three of you for appearing. Thank you, Russ. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Dave. You're all great friends of mine.
This was fun.
So glad to have met you. Gosh, over 20 years. I love all of you. Is there anything, any last words that something I didn't say that you've just been dying to say?
I'm good.
Okay.
That's it.
All right.
I'm
So
just hoping Dave doesn't, have any more nuggets he can just drop.
I've already logged off.
all right. Good night. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, guys.
And we're done recording.
Well, that was fun. Thank you.
That was fun. Thank you for appearing. I appreciate it.
And
Good
I
time,
gotta
man.
get
Thanks very
going.
much,
I gotta go quiz my son on his reading for the night.
Good
See you
luck.
later, Craig.
All right. Have a
See
good night,
you guys.
everybody.
All right. See you later, guys.
Bye, guys.